All right. So as I said, I'm Gabor Ubrey, and welcome to today's webinar, which is about MemoQ being more than just for translation memories, more than just for TM. Before I start, I like to get to know my audience a little. So let me show you two poll questions. One is, oops, I'm sorry, I clicked the wrong button. One is about your experience with CAD tools. Whether you have used the translation environment before, or you're new to it, or you have some mixed experience. I'm getting one comment from Jackie that the sound is now too low. Does anyone else have that problem? Because in that case, I'll try and go back and raise the volume a little. In the meantime, thank you for answering this first question. Okay, so I'll go back on the volume a little bit. Now, unfortunately, I think I don't have anything in between the two, so I'll just try to talk closer to the microphone. I hope that's okay with you, Jackie. And I have another poll question for you, which is specifically about MemoQ. Whether you have used MemoQ before or not, and why. All right, so thank you very much for voting. I'm going to share these results as well. I can see that most of you are using MemoQ either for a client or for yourself, and those of you who do not, also welcome to this webinar, and I hope you'll take away some useful things from it. The webinar is going to last approximately 45 minutes to an hour with ample time for questions at the end. I usually found the questions part at the end quite useful. The webinar is also being recorded, so if all goes well, we will be uploading this to our site in a day or two, and you will be able to find the recording in the webinar calendar in the webinar section of our website. Oops, I just noticed that you were not seeing my screen. So the topics that I want to cover in this webinar are the following. First, I will talk a little bit about the views in MemoQ, which I think are a very neat feature, but they are somewhat underused. And I will give you 3 use cases of what views in a MemoQ project are good for. Then I will move on and talk a little bit about ignore lists. Ignore lists are basically the custom dictionary that you can build, so to say, in the spell checker within MemoQ. Then upon request from the mailing list, I will say a few words about statistics and how to interpret the analysis results of MemoQ. And then I will move on to QA, explain the difference between errors and warnings and what sort of basic checks MemoQ's built-in quality assurance module offers. And finally, a little bit about terms and non-translatables. So that's enough talking. Let's cut to the chase. I'm going to set up a new English to German project for this. What I'm going to show you, excuse me, I think I'm one of those persons that cannot talk and type at the same time. So I'm setting up an English to German project here. I came prepared with a set of files which you can see here on my desktop. These are XML files, and these are actually strings from MemoQ's own user interface. And we translate those strings through an XML format. I also have an existing TM which contains the existing English to German translations. So basically what I'm going to reproduce here is what we do every time we release a new build of MemoQ. New builds tend to include a number of new or changed strings. So what we are doing is just we import the current strings, pre-translate from the translation memory, take the in-context exact matches, and just have the few changed or new strings translated. So I'm going to use this TM in my project. You can see it has almost 7,000 entries in it. Well, just real quick, let me go to the settings and choose a different segmentation rule from the default, because for these strings we actually do not use any segmentation. I know that is teasing and not fair, so I will come back to this and show how to change the segmentation rules. I see a remark in the questions box: has the webinar started? I only see the presentation slide. I noticed that happening before, but then I changed some settings, and according to my feedback you should be seeing my screen. Does anybody else have the problem of not seeing my screen? You should be seeing MemoQ and the project home interface right now. If you're seeing what I think you should be seeing, then also please drop a note. Okay, I've got 2 responses, so it's probably a local problem. Okay, I'm not sure. Maybe you can try and connect to the webinar again. I hope that will help. All right, so now I have set up a project. I have a translation memory. I picked segmentation rules whose job is to not do any segmentation. Let's import the documents. I'm going to use add document as. Select the 4 files. We are dealing with XML, remember, so you need to pick a filter configuration in order to get any meaningful import, and then move ahead with the import. This is going to complete in a second. And right away, let's pre-translate all of these strings. The only thing that I care about is exact match with context. So I want MemoQ to insert only 101% matches. Those are the ones that I'm completely certain about. Everything else will have to go through my translator and will need to get reviewed or translated. Okay, how do I verify the results? I'm just randomly going to open one of these files here, and what you can see is indeed a lot of the segments pre-translated. If you take a look at the status bar, then for this particular file I have 2 empty segments left and 144 pre-translated. One of the empty segments is right here, and what I get here is an 88% match. The reason being a typo has been actually introduced into the source. All right, I really want to do this to demonstrate views. If I have a lot of small files here and I don't want to deal with all of them one by one, then that's the first use for views. I'm just going to select all of these documents, go to Create View, and what do I need to do? I do need to give my view a name, so I'm just going to call it All. And you have a couple of frequent options here, and I'm using the first one, which says simply glue documents together. So that's what it does. If I just enter a name, okay, this dialog, then what MemoQ does is glue all of these documents together. You can see that in this interface I have 2 tabs. One is for documents, the other one is for views. So let's take a look at this brand new view of mine. You can just see all of the segments basically as a single document, and that in this case is 1177 pre-translated segments and 2 empty. Now it's important to know that what you're seeing here is not a new document, it's not a different document, it is really a view of the existing documents. So if I make any edit here, I'm just typing something in here and confirming this segment. This is actually changing the very same segment that is there in my corresponding document. I can go back to the list of documents. I think this one is going to be tricky. And voila, now I'm looking at a specific document, and what you can see is that the first segment reflects the edits that I did. So this is a different view of the same set of segments that come from the documents. And because this is segment-based, it also comes with a limitation. And this is a limitation that is going to stay as far as I can see. And that is, in a view, you cannot join or split segments. And if you think about it, the reason for that is quite straightforward. You can include segments from lots of different documents, even in a different order in a view. So something that is next to each other in a view is not necessarily two adjacent segments from a document. Also, the other way around, as long as you have a view, you cannot join or split segments in the base documents either. Okay, so this was the first use of views. I'm going to drop this view here. I'm removing it. And let me show you another use. And that is I can extract those few segments that are really relevant for me. I don't really want to deal with a huge set of over 1,000 segments in this case. I really only want to do with those two segments that ended up not being pre-translated for me. So again, I'm selecting all documents. I go to Create View. And I'm calling this one Work. And I'm choosing this option that says only rows that are not started. So this is based on the status of each row in my documents. And if I create my view based on this, it's going to be a really small one. It contains only those segments from out of those 1177 whose status was at that time not translated. And here, let me go over into a little bit of a workflow aspect, because it's not at all obvious that you're working on your own. So this is a useful tool if you're just dealing with a single project on your computer. But basically, what we are doing in this case with MemoQ, I'm going to export this view as a bilingual document. I can export the view as a bilingual document just as a regular translation document. I can choose from any of the formats that are listed here. I can have a MemoQ bilingual document or a MemoQ XLIF document. I can then import that into a different project where it will show up as a translation document. It can be on a different computer. I can have it translated there, and I can bring it back into MemoQ. Now I'm going to show you something very similar and even more exciting. I'm going to choose the two-column RTF format. So let me export this view into two-column RTF format. I'm saving it as a document on my desktop. And there it is. I can open it up in Word and do some edits in it. Sorry, I cannot talk and type. I really had to realize that today. I should be trying to type German here. You can see the source segment here. You can see that the tags are replaced by basically just these numbers in square brackets. You can type translations in the target side. You can add a comment. This already has a comment because our filter puts the string ID in there. And there I go. I'm finished with my changes. Now I can go back and say import update bilingual. I'm picking my file. This would work in the exact same way, whether it's an MBD, an XLIF file, or this two-column RTF format. MemoQ looks at the file. It tells me that it has encountered a view which corresponds to this file. There's a little secret hidden ID in the file. And it asks me if I want to update it in my project. And that's exactly what I do. And I get a short report which tells me that based on this file, during the import, MemoQ changed this document or view in my project, and it updated the target segment in 2 rows, changed the comment in 2 rows, or did both in 0 rows, or did both in 0 rows. Okay. And if I take a look at my view now, you can see that whatever I typed into the document in Word is now neatly imported into my MemoQ project. Okay. Now, this was the second use of views, to just create a list of the segments that I want to deal with based on some criteria. Now I looked at segment status. I can also look at only segments that contain comments. I can only look at segments that happen to be not logged. And I'm going to show you a third example, which is, I think, a really neat one. I'm dropping this view. You don't necessarily have to drop it. I just compulsively do that. And I'm going to extract all the repetitions. So I can deal with the repetitions up front. And the way to do that is, again, create view. I'm calling it reps this time. And I pick the option to extract repetitions. Here I have yet another option, only one occurrence of each. If I don't tick it, then if a segment occurs 3 times, then I will get it 3 times in my view. If I do tick this option, then no matter how many times a segment occurs, as long as it's 2 or greater, I will only get a single instance of it in my view. So let's do it this way now. I'm extracting all the repetitions and all of their instances. And what I get is a much shorter file. It only contains some 465 segments, as the status bar tells me. So this way I can deal with the repetitions up front. And I can do the same trick as I showed you before. I can export this as a bilingual, have it translated in another environment, and take it back into my project. So this is about it regarding views. I want to show you, before I move on to my next topic, which is ignore lists, I want to show you one sort of advanced detail that's good for playing around with at home, and a related thing. So yet again, I'm going back to the starting point and choose Create View. And if any of these options are not enough for me, I can click on this button, which is Advanced Options, which brings up a dialog that used to be the basic dialog in MemoQ previously. And it looks like a bit of a monster, or at least I always thought this dialog looked like a bit of a monster, so that's why we added the simpler one. But I actually heard one user say, well, whenever I brought up this dialog, I felt like I was in a candy store. So that's a very optimistic way of looking at it. Here we have all the options that are available for views. Here's filter by frequency. This is, if you tick this box, this corresponds to extract repetitions. Here you can enter expressions either for the source or the target. So MemoQ will take only those segments that contain any of the expressions that you enter here. Here in the bottom right, you can tell MemoQ to sort the resulting view. You can sort by match rate, frequency, or alphabetically by source or target, etc., etc. And here, you can filter by segment status. Again, the options that you see here are sort of the common ones, and then you can find all the neat details in the other tabs. Whatever you tick here, MemoQ takes it as it includes all segments that meet any of the conditions that you tick here for segment status. Okay, I'm not actually going to use any of these options now to create a view, but rather I'm going to go into this repetitions document that I created, and I just want to show you on a similar note that you can filter, whether it's a document or a view, you can filter your translation grid on the fly. Some of you may already know this, but if you don't, I think this is a really neat thing to learn. You can just select some text here and press Control-Shift-F. This is really similar to Control F, because it's closely related to find and replace after all. What MemoQ did is it put name in quotes into this source box, and effectively it hit, I think, this button for me. And that means now I'm seeing only segments that contain the expression that is shown in the source field. Now if I go back to the grid and I don't have any text selected, I can press Ctrl-Shift-F again, and that drops the filter. I can choose another word. Let's make it an expression this time for this, and I can press Ctrl-Shift-F, and then MemoQ only gives me the segments that contain for this, which by a weird coincidence happen to be the same ones as before. Okay, so this is on-the-fly filtering within a document. So enough about views and filters and documents. I think it's time to move on to ignore lists. There are basically two ways to do spelling in MemoQ. One is the curly underlines. You can see an instance of that right here in this document in Yayata, because the last letter is in parentheses. Or you can do spelling if you press F7, which brings up the spell checking dialog. Now before I actually, let me explain what these buttons do here. Correct is obvious. Whatever MemoQ highlighted here as a spelling mistake, if you hit correct, MemoQ will replace that with the text that is right here. Okay, you can press skip, and that means MemoQ will ignore this single error, but the next time it encounters the same word, say here, it will be highlighted again. So this is a one-off ignore. You can press skip all, which is already more than that. Then MemoQ memorizes that, and it will not highlight the same spelling error or alleged spelling error as long as the current project is open. But that is only in memory. So as soon as you close the project, that list will be flushed, it becomes empty, and MemoQ forgets about all the words for which you pressed skip all. And here's the most interesting one, add, which permanently remembers this as a word that is actually correct. Now I pressed it, and I've got a message coming up which tells me there's no ignore list active in the current project. Please go to the ignore lists tab and select an ignore list. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to ignore lists. Why is this all needed? MemoQ maintains any number of ignore lists that you care to use. So I'm going to create a new one. I'm calling it MQ demo, and it's for German. So it's added to the list, it's ticked in, that means whatever is on this list, the spell checker will ignore. And at the bottom you can also see this drop-down list, and this is what tells MemoQ, when I press add, which list MemoQ should add the new expressions to. So let's see how this works. I go back to spelling, I press add, and now whenever I do that, that word is stored in my ignore list. I can go back and I can edit this list. So if by mistake I added a word, I can take it out again. Also, these ignore lists are not just simple files or stored in a hidden location and hard to access. These are in fact resources. MemoQ has this concept of resources, and that's, I would say, one of the themes actually of this more than just for TM webinar. Traditionally, you would think of translation memories and term bases as resources. MemoQ takes this concept a lot further. We also have LiveDocs Corpora, but we will have a separate webinar on that. And we also have a number of light resources, one of these being ignore lists. So let's take a look at these. I'm going to leave the spell checking dialog now and open up the resource console. The resource console is a central management interface where you can access all of your resources that MemoQ deals with. You have translation memories, term bases, and LibDocs corpora here at the top. But if you go down a little, you can see ignore lists. So regardless of which project you're working in, here you can see all the ignore lists that exist on your computer. What makes this a resource? Why is this more than just a file? Well, you can import and export it, so they are interchangeable, exchangeable. And they can be either local or remote. You can also have, if you have a server, this one here at the bottom with the sun and the cloud is actually a remote ignore list. So you can have a number of translators, proofreaders share the same ignore list, work against it to build the same ignore list. And why is this whole complication needed at all? It's not needed, but the idea here is when you're dealing with text specific to a customer, to a client, you probably end up facing a lot of proper names or funny spellings, whatever is typical for that customer, that you don't want highlighted by the spell checker. But those same words may very well be spelling errors in a different or neutral context. So this way you can choose which ignore lists to use in which projects. Okay, next one on my agenda is statistics. But now that we took a look at resources, let me tie back in with the segmentation that I showed you at the very beginning before I imported these XML files. So if I go back to the resource console and take a look at all the kinds of resources that I have here, the second one is segmentation rules. What you see here is a long list of default segmentation rule sets for all the different languages that MemoQ supports. Let's now only take a look at the segmentation rule sets that are available for English. There's the default one, obviously, but there are a couple of other ones, and one of these is what I called no segmentation for English. If I just click any random one and choose edit, then I see this fairly formidable set of regular expressions, and I don't really want to go into segmentation here, but what you can see here is these are all the rules that tell MemoQ what are the contexts where it should start a new segment. The first rule, more or less, says if there's a sentence ending mark followed by one or more spaces and then a capital letter, then you should start a new segment right here after the sentence ending mark. The point being, if you want a segmentation rule set that performs no segmentation at all, then what you do is you just delete all the rules from this first column. And that tells MemoQ, well, just don't care, never start a new segment. That means within structural units. So if you're importing content that has several paragraphs, obviously the paragraphs will all end up in different segments. Segmentation always occurs on the below paragraph level. Okay, so this was what I promised you when I teased you with the segmentation rules. And now let's take a look at statistics. And in order to get a bit of more fuzzy results, I'm actually going to do a bit of a trick here. Let me remove the view. And let me go back to the default English segmentation rules. This will make quite a bit of a difference, and this way I will end up with a lot more fuzzy hits from my translation memory. In order to get my documents without segmentation, I now need to re-import them. But that's quite easy to do. I just select and click re-import. And now MemoQ imports all of the source files again, but with the current segmentation rules. So let's take a look at what statistics has to say about this. I still have my documents selected. I click statistics. This is the easiest icon to recognize on the toolbar, I think, because it has these bars that are reminiscent of a diagram. There's a whole range of options here. In the scope, you can tell MemoQ what to analyze. All documents in a project or only the selected document, which in this case happens to be the same thing, and whether or not to show results separately for each file. I definitely want that to happen now. In the counts section, that's an optional section. You can turn it on or off. I'm going to turn it on, and I'm going to request a status report. And then in the analysis group, you can tell MemoQ what sort of translation memories and corpora to use for the analysis. You can have project TMs and corpora. You can ask MemoQ to provide a breakdown by source. That's useful in case you have multiple TMs in the project or multiple corpora. And homogeneity, which I'm going to come back to later. Okay, so now with these options, let's do a calculation. And let's take a look at this output here. Because I ticked show counts, I have two sections here at the top. One is counts, the other is analysis. Counts is something that it's really just a really simple thing. MemoQ looks at each row, adds up the characters, and then it does detect repetitions. So what this tells me is that there are a total of 1,272 segments, which among themselves contain 6,227 words, or 38,000 odd characters, of which 450 segments are repetitions. So what is exactly a repetition here? Now, this is already a matter of definition. If you have a segment that occurs 2 times, then MemoQ will count the second occurrence as a repetition, but not the first. And among themselves, these 450 segments contain this number of words and this number of characters, plus, based on the number of source words, this is 18% of the total. So the percentage column is based on the word count, not the segment or the character count. And whatever comes below this is a breakdown by segment status. Because after a fresh import, I have all of my segments not started and none are pre-translated or edited or confirmed or any of the other ones. So this is the count section, which is the simpler one. And here's the analysis, which is the really exciting one. It's a different breakdown of the same data. This is the result of MemoQ performing a lookup for every single segment that it processes against the translation memories and LiveDocs corpora that are part of my project. Normally, or very frequently, you would only look at this table. So this tells me there are this many segments. Okay, we know this is the same thing as the top row of counts. And then the proper reading order, so to say, is go to 101%. So in context, exact match. Whatever is an in context exact match ends up in this row. So if MemoQ finds a segment for which the best match is exactly 101%, that ends up in this category. And this category now holds 1,110 segments with this amount of words and characters. Based on the word count, this is 74% of the total. Okay, moving on. If there is a 100% match, then we'll end up in this category. There are no 100% matches. If a segment happens to yield a fuzzy match in any of these ranges, then that segment will end up in this category. However, here comes the twist. If a segment happens to be a repetition, let's say that segment occurs 3 times, and there happens to be a 90% match for obviously all of those 3 occurrences in the TM, then MemoQ will put one segment into this band for the 90% match, and the remaining 2 will go into repetition, because repetition is so to say, a stronger category, because once you translate the first, you will get 100% match for the rest, or you will actually get all the rest auto-propagated. So this is how MemoQ looks at each segment, performs lookup, and decides which bucket to put that segment into and which bucket's word count to increase by the number of words and characters in that segment. I have a question from Amy, and I will, okay, let me answer that now. Basing percentages purely on word counts is completely misleading in terms of character counts for a language like German. This has a serious impact on quotations. Do you envision true support for character counts in the future? Okay, this is a very, very, very reasonable question. Let me give you 3 different kinds of answers to this. The first one is just a word of warning. So if I close the statistics dialog now, and I go back to my list of documents, and what I'm going to do is just randomly confirm a bunch of segments. Oops, that's not what I need to do. Randomly confirm a bunch of segments in this document, and go back to the list of documents. And what you can see here is that I have a progress indicator here, which says 57%. My advice is take this with a pinch of salt, with a big pinch of salt. This percent is based on something even worse than words. It's based on segment count. So if you have a 100 segment document, out of which 57 are confirmed, then you will see 57% here. That's absolutely not indicative of your true progress, because segments tend to come in different sizes. There are short ones and long ones. So this is just an aside. Now, if I go to the overview panel and go to reports, there are 2 interesting reports here. One is progress and the other one is analysis. These reports practically correspond to the counts and analysis section of the statistics dialog that I just showed you. So if I count an analysis here, then MemoQ will perform the same thing that it performed when I was looking at statistics. You can also see that this is the time when I performed this calculation, so when this table under analysis was created. This is important because this is stored with your project. So until you press calculate now again, you will always see the same numbers here, even if you close the project and come back here. And if you take a look at the numbers here, you can choose between segments, words, or characters for the percentages counts. And the chart here is based on the percentages. So if you go to the overview panel, you can already do that and change the way percentages are calculated dynamically. Here, if you alternate between segments and words, you can see that it really makes a big difference. And finally, to specifically answer your question, Amy, I can go back to the statistics dialog itself. Let me just do an analysis now. Calculate my analysis. And there's this export function where you can choose from a number of formats. I think the most interesting one is CSV, that's comma-separated values, per file, including all information. So this would be, for those of you that in ancient times worked with Trados Workbench, this would be something very similar to the Trados analysis log. Let me save this CSV file onto my desktop. There's the file. And if I open it with Excel, I need all files. Sorry, Excel is always tricky with opening CSV files, but we'll get it right the second time. So this is delimited, but it's delimited by a comma and not a tab. Okay. So here's a different kind of breakdown of the same table. It's just basically rotated 90 degrees, but what you see here, you have a row for each file. In case you analyze multiple files, you would have a different row here. And here's the figures for 101%. So these are the 101% matches, which are this many segments and this many words and this many characters. You will have the same for repetition, this many words, this many characters. Now, as soon as you have this data in Excel, you can just write your formula and add up either characters or words or whichever you prefer and base your percentages and quotes on that. So the output in MemoQ it's neat, it's HTML, it looks good, but if you actually want to base a quote in it, then I think the ideal format to use is this CSV export, and that pretty much solves every problem from then on. I hope this answers your question, Amy. Okay, I'm running a bit short on time, so we covered statistics, and it's 5:45. I definitely want to talk a little bit about the QA feature. Some of you may already know this, for some of you this may be new. Let me go into this one here. And let's take a look at this segment. So basically what the QA module does is that as soon as you confirm a segment, it performs various checks, and if any of those checks fail, it adds a warning to your segment. And the warning is this orange lightning icon that you see here. If you want to know, if you hover over it, the tooltip says there is one warning out of which one is not ignored. And if you want to see the specific list, then what you see is extra space at the end of the target segment. This is actually a false alarm because that extra space is right here before the tag. But I can generate this warning in this other segment by actually adding an extra space. I type that after lookup error. And there you go. You receive a warning about the extra space at the end of segment. It's important to keep in mind the difference between warnings and errors. Errors always have to do with tags in MemoQ, so it's a very formal thing. It has nothing to do with your translation's linguistic quality. If you have an error, that only means something that is required from the translation is missing from your target segment, and if you have an error, it's indicated by this exclamation mark. What I did was I deleted that tag, which is a required tag. So if you don't insert that into the target, then MemoQ gives you this error, which tells you required tag PH0 is missing from the target. You will get this either with required inline tags, and what is a required inline tag is defined in the filter configuration, or for those curly bracket numbered tags, which are simply needed by MemoQ to reconstruct the export in the original file format. So until you have errors in the document, if you try to export the document, that will not be possible, and MemoQ will tell you that there are errors that you need to correct. But what I want to look here right now, look at here, is warnings. So what can you do with warnings? Some of these are false alarms, like the one you see here. So you can just double click and say, I ignore this warning. And if all the warnings for a segment are ignored, then you have the lightning bolt icon showing up in this grayish color, meaning that it is ignored. What are the most useful QA checks? I think some of the simpler, more useful ones would be the extra space at the end of the segment, which you do not need to use in MemoQ. Multiple spaces next to each other, so now I added 2 spaces in between lookup and error, and MemoQ gives me a warning for that, several consecutive white spaces. And depending on your language combination, initial capitalization. So now I start my translation with a lowercase l, and MemoQ also gives me a warning for that. So this is the simple one. I see Jackie writing that numbers are very important, particularly in patterns, and that is very true. Let me try and find a number in this document. Here's a number. So what I'm going to do here is cheat and say translate review 1 as überprüfungsstein 40. If I confirm that segment, MemoQ, among other things, gives me a warning that says numbers in source and target segment don't match. So that is exactly the next thing that I was going to say. The QA check for numbers. And finally, what I find really useful is the QA check for terminology. Let me add the term base into this project because I don't have one yet. And let me add a term so I'm telling MemoQ that translation is a term and it has to be translated as Übersetzung. Voila, I've got my terminology result. But again, I'm entering a translation here that does not contain Übersetzung. And voila, that prompted MemoQ to give me the warning, translation of source term, translation is missing from the target. Very often this will actually spot very real terminology problems, and sometimes what MemoQ highlights in the source may not be the term that MemoQ thinks it is, and in that case it's just yet another false alarm. Unfortunately, QA tends to generate, no matter what kind of QA we are talking about, a bunch of false alarms, but also very real warnings. How do you configure what you want MemoQ to check and what you don't want MemoQ to check? You won't believe me. QA settings are a resource in MemoQ. So let me go to Settings in Project Home, and this category here is for QA settings. And I know you're getting tired of this. What you're seeing here is a list of QA settings resources on my computer. You can see that I've been playing around with this a lot in various webinars. Here we have the default settings. Default settings are always read-only. You can't edit them. So if you want to use your custom settings, then what you do is just clone this resource I'm calling it Webinar QA, and now you can edit it, and that basically brings up this nice big window with all the little bells and whistles that affect how the QA module works. We have a check for consistent translation, so the same segment should be translated in the same way. We have a check for terminology, which you can enable or disable here. I'm really not going to go through all of the options. These are actually documented in the help, and many of these, I would say, are self-explanatory. So this is one thing to look at, and voila, you actually manage to get acquainted with yet another resource in MemoQ. I have a question from Daphna. I think I will get back to that at the end of the webinar. And before I move on to my last topic, one more word on errors as well as warnings. What I've been showing so far is the little lightning bolt icon or the exclamation mark right here in the translation grid. And I agree, even though we have a shortcut and everything, it's a little bit cumbersome to just bring up this dialog, take a look at the warnings that MemoQ gave me, and then check my segment. There's a much faster way to do that for all the segments in either a document or the entire project, and that is Operations, Resolve Errors and Warnings. That takes me to this interface. There you can see a list of the actual warnings and or errors at the bottom. With control up and down, you can navigate this list. And whenever you select a specific item, the segment that it refers to is duplicated here at the top. In case it's a kind of warning that refers to a specific part of the segment, it's also highlighted for you. So for instance, here first letters are not capitalized. The same way MemoQ selects the first letter of my translation, so I can actually just start typing, correct it, press Control Enter, and already my warnings have disappeared. This one with the lighter blue color indicates an ignored warning. I can also ignore warnings straight from here. And I can do a lot of things. I can sort this list by where the warnings are coming from. All specific kinds of warnings have a code, so if I just want all of them in a single bunch, then I can sort by code. Or if I don't care about a specific kind of warning, I can just ignore all warnings of that kind. And voila, they all became ignored. If I only want to ignore a term warning that refers to a specific term, I also have an option for that. I can choose ignore all warnings of this kind, and I can choose whether I only want to ignore those that refer to the missing term translation or all terminology warnings. Okay, and if I need a bit of more context, then I can just double-click an item, and that takes me right to the document where that segment happens to be at. All right, that more or less wraps it up for me. I think we are fairly short on time, so I'm going to skip my last topic. Basically, I was going to just show you Euro-Term Bank. Well, we do have enough time for that, so I'm going to show you Euro-Term Bank terminology lookup in MemoQ. There is a shortcut for looking up terms, which is I would say the terminology equivalent of doing concordance searches. It's right there in the operations menu, lookup term. And if you bring up that dialog, you basically have two options. One is to search MemoQ term bases. So I can just enter France here, and that will give me translation, which I just added to my term base. And then I can browse these results. Or I can go and say search Euro-Term Bank. Euro-Term Bank is an online terminology database that was created as an EU project. And as part of that project, we created this plugin that allows you to do lookup straight from MemoQ. If you don't want to do that, you can click the online lookup link, and that takes you straight to the website of Euro-Term Bank. There you can do the exact same kind of queries, but obviously you need a separate browser window for that. Instead, you can do the same thing from within MemoQ. So let's just search for dog. MemoQ queries the Euro-Term Bank service, and we have all the results for dog, including subject matter area, definition, and whatever else the Euro-Term Bank entry happens to contain. So this was just one other neat feature that I wanted to highlight. We do have ample time for questions, so actually I think I'm going to go back to everything that's been asked. If you have any question at this point, then feel free to ask. I hope I answered Amy's question about percentages being based on words and or characters. I talked about the check for numbers in the QA module. And Daphna's question is, speaking of tags, Is there a tag content dictionary of sorts? Many times I can't understand the content of a text sequence, thus can't tell if it is necessary, and I deal with a lot of meaningless tags. It really depends on the specific format you are dealing with. What we are seeing here is an XML document. If it's an XML document, then you can be fairly certain that every single tag has an important meaning there. I can show you the preview for this document, which gives you an overview of the actual XML, and you can see, well, there's not much extra info here because these are simple tags, but you can see the originals of the tags. With some other formats, for instance, when you're dealing with Word documents, I'm not exactly sure to what depth the tags are described that are produced by our Word filter. Some of those are more or less self-explanatory. You will have a tag for a tab character. NT will often stand for non-translated. If it's a special character, then that will also show up as the CH tag. And most of the tags you get in a Word document or a docx file, that's what I'm talking about, are RPR, which comes from the docx format itself, which means text run property, so run property. That just means formatting change. And the filter works in such a way that already MemoQ is not aware of what sort of formatting change that is. So what you can do in those cases is just take a look at the preview and see if those tags actually stand for something or not. And the one situation where I see a lot of extra tags imported that are not needed would be documents converted from PDF files. And the reason for that is that OCR tools go for high fidelity. So just to get a very, very close resemblance of how the exact characters are located in the original PDF, these PDF converters will introduce minor formatting changes in the kerning and the spacing of the letters that are completely not visible to the eye, but MemoQ cannot really say what is a necessary formatting change and what is not necessary, so well, cannot change, say, beyond a certain point. And that way, a lot of these tags do end up being imported to MemoQ. But for PDFs, there is a macro called CodeZapper. You can also find it in the files section of the MemoQ Yahoo Groups list, which is really useful to clean up documents before being imported into MemoQ or other tools for that matter. Then a remark from Cherry. If I have a number like 1.3.1 or version 4.5.5 on both sides, it always says numbers don't match. That may be true, and we are working on improving our QA checks. Like you say, there are still a lot of false positives hanging around. A question from Jonathan: when you create a view with several documents, does auto-propagation work in the view? Yes. So in that sense, a view works as a single document because auto-propagation only works within a single document. That's a given in MemoQ at the time being. That means in the grid that you see at the same time. So if you have a repetition that happens to be in another document and you confirm this segment here, that will only be propagated if it's in this same grid. But in that sense, views are indeed a single document. So if you confirm a segment in a view, then it will get propagated within the view. That's the benefit of using a view indeed. I don't see a lot of questions coming up, but before I let you go, let me show you two more polls. One is about your opinion of MemoQ. We are interested in those of you who don't like it as much as those of you who do like it, and any feedback is welcome. Well, I'm sort of embarrassed to show the results of this poll, but thank you very much for voting anyhow. And finally, a question about this webinar. Also, please give honest answers. We are trying to make these webinars improve all the time. And if you feel you have some feedback to share that goes beyond just ticking did not like it or liked it but would not like to attend, then feel free to drop us an email. We are interested in hearing what you liked and what you didn't like. All right, so thank you very much for voting and also for the kind words in the questions box, Daphne. I can say that, well, I am, oops, again I clicked the wrong button. I am sharing the results of this, but I do encourage you, if you have any feedback to give us, or if you can suggest anything to improve, then do let us know. So again, thank you very much for attending this webinar. I'm going to stop the recording now, and the recording will be available in a few days in the webinar section. Thanks for attending, and have a good day then. Bye.